Sunday in the Breakfast Club, and I am Serious Mind. Responding to Sister Danger's topic this week, she did a really good video about an exchange that happened when she was out. She was talking to some guy. He made a pass. He tried to put his arm around her, and then also touched her in the butt. She didn't care for that. She let him know, and thankfully he respected that, and he apologized, and he didn't do it again. So that's good. That's a good exchange. I agree with Nathan that guy went too far. You don't you don't start going for the money right off the bat. At least I certainly wouldn't. Particularly nowadays. I mean, people are more aware of it. They're more conscious of it, more sensitive about it, and so you would think that somebody would have the presence of mind to think, hey, is this a good idea? Even if he was feeling some vibe, which clearly didn't exist, because from all indications from Sister Danger, she was not feeling it, and he shouldn't have been feeling her. But as she said, she reserves the right to change her mind, and everyone has the right to change their mind. Even if you do consent to something, you can always change your mind. So it's a good discussion. I think really comes down to is respect, because obviously, if you respect the other person, that doesn't mean you don't try to advance things if you think it's going that way, or if you'd like them to go that way. But it is kind of testing the waters, and if you go to that extreme where you start touching the naughty bits, as it were, there's a level of presumption. Now, I'm really glad that he was somebody, though, that was not so self-absorbed that he recognized that, hey, when she said no, no meant no, until such time she changed her mind, which she hadn't. So the other thing I think that's important to remember too is that in today's day we tend to view this so much as a male female thing, as this is something that happens to women, and I certainly think this happens more that way, but it certainly happens in the other direction. As I started thinking about preparing for this video, and I started thinking about what have I done in my past, and anything that where I was either skirting the line or did I step over the line, and I started thinking about interactions I had where in my case a woman might have been presumptuous and taken things a step further than I was prepared to at the moment. So it can happen both ways, but I think I understand the people that are kind of looking for this positive consent, because certainly the goal is a good one. Like, we're going to have fewer assaults and fewer rapes if people are communicating their intention, and that's true. I think, though, that there's this thought that somehow that nonverbal communication is excluded from that, and I don't think it is, or at least that it should be. We certainly can communicate our intent without words. What's important, I think, is that we're listening to whoever we're interacting with to find out, it's not only to their spoken word, but also their body language. Are they tensed up? Are they reciprocating? How are they behaving? Do they look under stress? Because that's really the difference, and that comes into the respect. If you respect the other person, even if you're really hoping that you can get with them, if you respect them, then you're gonna pay attention to those cues, not just their verbal cues. And we can make mistakes. And I preparing for this video, I thought of a number of times where I thought the person was wanting to go further or to initiate something, and then realized, that's not where they're going at all. And again, it's happened the other way around where someone misinterpreted something I said or did. And it can even happen when you are doing something. You could be messing around. Maybe it's just kissing, maybe it's a little touching, and somebody figures, okay, we're escalating, so let's escalate to the next level. And the other person goes, hey, wait a minute. I'm fine with what we were doing, but you're going somewhere that I don't want to go. If you've ever had that moment where you touch the wrong place or you do something that the other person didn't want, and then they go ah, and you go ah, and as long as that's what happens and becomes a hands off, and then you both reassess where you're at, I think that's okay. Again, I think of events in both directions in my life, and so I would say to the people that are really adamant about positive consent, every touch, even an unwanted touch, doesn't necessarily have to involve the police. And again, it has to come down to me, there's degrees, right? And so, if the people are respecting each other, then misinterpretations and misunderstandings, one, won't happen as often, and two, if they do, they don't have to be a traumatic event for either person, because I think certainly someone doing something to you against your will, without your consent, is a horrible violation and a terrible thing to have to go through, and certainly the further it goes, the worse it is. But also I think if you're unintending to hurt somebody and then you do, or you find out that you have, that's pretty traumatic too, for anybody who's a decent person. So no one, I think, the fact that we're striving to have people not get assaulted or not get raped, and then, I don't think there's anybody who wants to find out after the fact that they've become a rapist because they misinterpreted somebody. And, so we really have to look at this. Sister Danger talked about, people basically going through the checklist. Oh, I'm going to touch you here now. Is that okay? Yeah, that's never going to happen. Although, it makes me wonder. I did see a study that said that millennials are having far less sex than either of the previous generations, either two previous generations before them. Maybe that's part of it. People are maybe a little on eggshells. And I think that's unfortunate. I think it shouldn't be a punitive thing. It really should be an open thing. But how do we deal with one another, interact with one another, and learn so we can enjoy each other without violating each other or disrespecting one another. So I think that's important. Now, the Sister's Dangerous point about the checklist, I'll call it. Yeah, I think that would certainly, for me, it would certainly kill the mood. And I think for a lot of people it would. But, I thought about it a little bit more because, you don't want to just kind of wave it away. I thought of a couple things. One, on the positive side, that can be worked into your play. If I'm just thinking, not everybody's into being verbal or talking dirty or whatever like that. But for people that are open to it, that could actually make it fun, because it doesn't have to be, I'd like to touch your breast now, is that okay? It doesn't have to be mechanistic. It could be, oh baby, I want to grab those tits, or I want to touch this, or I'm going to stick this, or I'm going to lick that, and it can come both ways. And I think that, again, that's another part about being open. If we don't make this taboo, if this becomes a normal thing, because I think some people have a taboo about it because they're not used to it. It's just, but if you can work that in, if both partners are amenable, or potential partners are amenable, then that can really, on the one hand, get that that vocalized consent without becoming a dry, boring, mechanistic thing. And dry was an unintended pun, but I'll take it. It fits here. So I think that's another another step that we can take. That's just one more tool in the arsenal. Now, one other thing about positive consent, because what we're really talking about, I think, generally speaking, is that people are talking about vocalized positive consent. what I've heard expressed from a lot of people is that nonverbal communication in this instance is not reliable for a number of reasons, not least of which is that if the potential victim is under threat or coercion, they may not respond, vocally, which is true, and they also may not fight back. That's something that unfortunately a lot of victims are put on the spot. People question them and they say, "Well, did you fight back? Did you say no?" And a lot of times they don't, because again they're feeling under threat, and so just because they hadn't said no doesn't mean that they're consenting with what's going on, and so that was one of the issues. But I think can be a danger if we completely remove nonverbal communication from the equation, and I think even with verbal communication, there's still some dangers, because two things. One, just because people are vocalizing, it doesn't mean that they're not being coerced or threatened. It can still happen, because if you really feel you're in danger, and you want to avoid what you view as the potential consequences, you might say yes just for out of self-preservation, and it doesn't mean, and you still haven't really consented. It's any consent given under duress is not, certainly not binding on you, so there's still potential danger there. The other is that consent can be withdrawn at any time. So here's the problem, or a potential problem I see, is that people are getting along and doing something, and then at some point one person says, "I want to do X, Y, or Z," and the other person says yes. Well, if they change their mind, which they're perfectly at liberty to do, if we've said that nonverbal communication is not sufficient, then we may have armed a potential attacker, or at least somebody who's willing to become an attacker by virtue of not paying attention to the other person. Because now, if it goes to a trial and someone says, "Well, did you have consent?" and the person can say, "Well, yes, I said I wanted to do X, Y, or Z," and the person said, "Yes, I'm okay with that," and I proceeded under that position, and if they changed their mind, they didn't tell me. And again, because we're making this all about being verbal, so that could potentially weaken the hand of a victim, and that concerns me. I think the goal is a good one. They're trying to remove any onus upon a victim or a potential victim, alleged victim, however you want to look at it. But I don't think that really happens, and I think it may actually raise the bar, because again, if verbal is the only thing that we're going to accept, then again, that person could still feel coerced. They may not do it because they're afraid, or if they change their mind and they don't say something, then what? I think in the minds of a lot of juries, I think they would probably lose. And to be fair, if you were involved with somebody and they said it was okay, and they didn't inform you that they changed their mind, I think finding out that you've become an attacker after the fact would be pretty horrible. Because I don't want to attack anybody, and if you tell me afterward, "Oh man, I really didn't want to do that, but I didn't know how to tell you," now what? So being violated is horrible, and I think finding out you're a violator unwittingly would be maybe not equally horrible, but sure as hell would be terrible. So I don't think it's a panacea that people hope. But again, if it works, I'm all for it. So anyway, it's just not as cut and dried as people would maybe hope. So anyway, thanks to Sister Danger for the topic. It's a good one. Nathan for his response, and I also want to thank especially JJ Talks, because I think for this topic, while it's not as cut and dried as far as one gender versus the other, it can happen in either direction, and certainly can happen in gay, any other kind of relationship. But I think it's good, given that Sister Danger is a woman, and we're coming from that perspective, at least on what happened with her. It's good that it's not just a bunch of guys responding to her. That we got another woman voice on there. So and JJ, I think they're largely in agreement, but I think there might have been one or two spots where JJ differed, and that's good to hear. It's important to hear that. So I'm looking forward to what Got That Funk has to say tomorrow. And leave any comments you have for me in the down below, and I'll happy to take a look. Have a good week, everybody.